With this special lunchtime colloquium, one more in our series in the One Book Many Worlds, where we look at different topics from the book Gun Island and depart from there to have fun interdisciplinary conversations. As always, when we have one of these conversations, we have a very special session, but today's is even more special because the guests that we have here today are two longtime friends of the Rachel Carson Center, and in fact, I just found out today that one of them met the other on their very first day many, many years ago when coming to the Rachel Carson Center. So they've had a conversation for many years, probably over a decade. Would you say that's correct? And they have also both been active in the RCC community, supervising doctoral students, teaching with certificate students, and teaching also in the master's program. So some of you here may have taken some of their courses. So this is to say, today we have a very special conversation between geology and Christian theological ethics. I'll start by introducing one of the first two speakers first, as always. And this is Professor Dr. Markus Vogt, who holds the chair of Christian social ethics at LMU Munich. He specializes in a whole number of different things to do with Christian ethics and the environment, Christian ethics and the social world, and has done a lot of work and published many books on the subject. But I recently learned, actually just a little while ago, that he has met a pope. He met Pope Francis when he was presented with a prize from the Vatican in 2017. And this is I have to read it because I'm not very good with the Latin, unfortunately. I think, Marcus, you can do this better. The Centesimus Anno Pro Pontifice Prize. So he was awarded this in 2017 and met Pope Francis. And following this, wrote the libretto based on Laudato Si for the Berliner Philharmonic. So you can see this here. So he has been involved also with music based on Laudato Si. So please join me in welcoming Markus Vogt for his quick introduction.
Shall I start?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you for the invitation, and I look forward to our dialogue. I brought with me 10 theses about climate justice and migration as a background for interpretation Amitav Ghosh's Gun Island. First, the relevance of the perspective of literature. Ghosh addresses climate change as a crucial topic of understanding life, social transformation, and global conflicts in our time. He does that not only in his novels, but also in essays like The Great Dearrangement, Climate Change and the Unthinkable, German translation Die Verblendung, in which he accuses our civilization of largely neglecting the social impact of climate change. His central thesis, which is especially interesting for me as a theologian, is that he says we need more to rediscover understanding of nature in a magical and unthinkable context. The novel Gun Island is exemplary for this, in which the mysterious powers of nature are illustrated using the Hindu Bengalic myths and of the snake goddess who traces Dean and Rafi follow on their wandering across the world. Ghosh assumes that we cannot understand nature without the help of natural sciences alone, but also need myths, religion, literature, rites, and culture. He thus links ecological, social, cultural, and economic aspects in a highly exciting way. This illustrates the concept of environmental humanities, which is central for the Rachel Carson Center. And it's in a special way also interesting for me, for ethics, because I think we need a more everyday life understanding of conflicts. And so the background of literature is very important for ethics, which is really helpful in everyday life. My second thesis. Justice is not understandable in the 21st century without climate change. Climate change is the focal point of global intergenerational and ecological justice. And in philosophy, we are used to think about justice just more in national terms and without the relation to nature and without the relation to time and future. For example, in Kant philosophy. And I think that needs a deep change in thinking about justice. The term ecological justice is not easy to define. Is it possible to adapt the term justice to relation to plants and animals? That is discussed, but it's quite clear we need to think about that. And it's quite clear we have a threefold externalization of the costs of our way of life to the nature, to future generations, and to people in global south. They are suffering more than we caused it, and they are suffering. That's not just, that's quite clear. Against this background, for example, Klaus Töpfer speaks about ecological aggression. Or you, Christoph, speak often about slow violence or structural violence. So it's a question of peace. And justice and peace are interconnected. I think if we don't stop the war against nature, we will not be able to stop the war between nations. The wars are financed with resource, with the money we get from natural resources. For example, Ulrich Brandt calls our way of life imperial, or Stefan Lessenich, our society externalization society. A colonialism with other means, normatively untenable state of affairs. So the WBGU, the global for German government, I think the most important ethical advice institution in Germany. They say the transformation of climate compatibility, to climate compatibility is therefore morally just as imperative as abolition of slavery and outlawing of child labor. My third thesis. The SDGs as normative roadmap. It's quite clear the most important roadmap for global justice or climate justice are the SDGs in connection and combination with the results of the Paris contract 2015. It's very important to combine both documents. And the main idea is the idea to combine ecological justice and social justice. So it's called green development rights. But we have a lack of deep understanding. What we are now doing is that we have no clear, or there are about two more goals about social justice. And though we are in some regions quite successful for more social justice, but it's on the cost of ecological resilience. So what we are doing now is to spread the Western way of life on the global. Wie im Westen, so auf Erden. So it's a background of a Christian belief in a better future. And the SDGs are implementing this model. And so we need a deeper understanding of green development, a new understanding of development, of freedom, of responsibility, and not just putting it without a deeper understanding of interacting social and ecological aims. And we have a lack of institution to implement the aims of Paris. The first thesis, the need of hope. In literature and films, the future expectations now are quite negative. Eva Horn, who was also a fellow here at the Rachel Carson Center, summarized it as future as a catastrophe. Or Harald Lesch, humanity abolishes itself. His interpretation of the Anthropocene as a catastrophic theory. Or struggle for Gaia, settling into the collapsing ruins of the house of modernity as expected modes of existence, so Bruno Latour. And quite often we have from Christian background interpretation of the model of apocalypse, but it's a secular reception quite often connected with a misunderstanding. Apocalypse is not a pessimistic view of future, but it's a combination of a theory of catastrophe with another understanding of hope. And the main thing is the criticizing power. And the main power in our time is the systems of fossil energy and of capitalism. So it's needed to connect the model of apocalypse with a criticizing power, and what we need is hope. And also in the secular reception of hope, we have a reception or a misunderstanding as tranquilizer. To say it's not so bad, we hope we will have a good future. But Christian hope is hope after the experience of the crucifying Christ, of the suffering, and it's not possible to understand Christian hope as a model of optimism. So David Eliot, Hope and Christian Ethics. So it's not an optimistic theory. It's a realistic theory, but not resignative. It's an active hope, with hope that it makes sense to act according our idea of justice without knowing what the future will bring. And that's quite a big difference. Or another book from Friedrich, Christian Hope and Climate Change. He thinks what we need is a down-to-earth understanding of Christian hope. So connected with that, what is really helping to have more resilience in our society. I have more theses, but I will just tell you the headlines for later on having time to discuss about it. The fifth idea is learning to deal with collapse phenomena. I think it's quite clear we'll have collapse phenomena, and Ugo Bardi, the Club of Rome report from 2017, that it's possible to deal with collapse phenomena, but it's a special art of making policy and social communication, and I think we have to learn that. And the sixth thesis, defining the legal status of climate refugees. I'm quite impressed by the book from Gaia Vince, the Normal Century. She says, if we have a 3 or 4 degree world, which we have to expect, we have in part quite big parts of the world are uninhabited. She speaks from the amount of the possibility of 3 billion people as refugees, nearly half of mankind. And it's not possible to take them all in the Western societies. So we have to discuss about the legal status of climate refugees, but it's not easy because it's not possible to include all, but it's necessary to organize it. Yes, and there we have a controversial ethical debate, but it's necessary because it's a cause of violence. Yes, and so my seventh thesis: indigenous knowledge as a key factor of climate resilience. So the answer to the problem of migration can only be to help the people to survive in the global south or in Bangladesh, in India. Gaia Windsor says it's possible that we have only in India 400 million refugees, because it's possible that the rain, the monsoon will stop, and so it's not possible to have the same mode of rice production in that area. So we need more knowledge, indigenous knowledge, for the ability of the people to adapt to the problem. I just had quite a good PhD thesis from Francis Newuzu, who studied also here, about indigenous knowledge in Nigeria. And 8, we need a new understanding of liberalism. You see, our main problem for climate justice now is that we have more autocratic regimes, like in USA with Trump, Xi Jinping in China, Putin in Russia, in Turkey Erdogan. So the democratic model of society is in the defensive. And it's connected with the idea of universal order responsibility. And without that, it's not possible to have political success. And that's, I think, the deep challenge for the discussion. And I think we misunderstood liberalism as market liberalism. And I'm impressed by the analysis why the Americans voted for Trump, for Patrick Deneen, why liberalism failed, or Michael Sandel, the democracy and common good theory. And it's quite clear we failed for a better and deeper understanding of justice and a deeper understanding of liberalism. Yes? Not to do what we want, but to be able to act in common. And the 9th thesis, emission trading as indispensable element on climate change. It's quite clear what we need, zero emissions, latest 2050. We will not reach it, so we have to accept more emissions, and then to have negative emissions with CCS, so carbon capturing and storage as natural or technical what is the term?
Solutions.
Yes, solutions, yes, and grandfathering. So we have a deep discussion in ethics of the models of climate change. But I think the main ideas are quite clear. And the last thesis, we have a need of spirituality. That comes back to my first thesis. It's not only a problem or challenge of political decisions or of ethical guidelines. We need, as Pope Francis says, a cultural revolution, a new understanding of the meaning of freedom, of welfare, of responsibility, of happiness. And without a change on this level, we will not be successful. And for that, novels like the novel from Gauche are so important. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Markus. So our next guest today is Anke Friedrich, who holds the chair for geology, also at Munich. And she specializes in, I think, an enormous amount of different aspects of geology, from what I gather. Of course, not as a non-natural scientist, perhaps they're more related than I know. But they range from active tectonics through earthquake studies, neotectonics, paleoseismology, tectonic geomorphology. I don't know what half of those words mean, by the way. She quantifies the charging deformation rates of the Earth on varying timescales, and I thought this was interesting. She looks from 10 years to 10 million years, so really huge timescales that she looks at. She has been at the LMU for quite a while, but a fun fact is that in her youth she also lived and studied in the US, and she went there with a scholarship to do ski racing, and in fact won several ski races, and is nearly an American champion. So with that, please welcome Anke Friedrich to the stage.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the nice introduction. Indeed, my homework was to give the perspective of a geologist, and that means indeed the perspective of someone who deals with time from 10 to 10 million years and beyond, and about natural catastrophes. But you will notice that I'm not using the word catastrophe, because now I'm taking the serious stand of a natural scientist, a geologist, and the disclaimer would be I'm also a human being, a person with some ethical standards, and I would like to not be quoted out of context when I now put this aside, because that forms the basis perhaps for our discussion, to really try to give you how do natural scientists think, how should some more of us be thinking maybe about the Earth, or what is important about the Earth when we're trying to understand climate change and the effects of climate change on the very short term. And that is really the big problem. I'm very comfortable talking in millions of years, and we are concerned with what happens tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. So this is why I'm just using the word here. And so some basic definitions. An event is what we talk about. Nature provides events. The Earth is a dynamic planet, and a dynamic planet is driven by various kind of forces. We call them endogenic or exogenic. Endo meaning within the Earth, coming from within the Earth, mantle convection, the heat that is available since the origin of the Earth. Then we have the exogenic forces, and those of course are well known to this round of people being driven mainly by the sun. But the debate now is whether humans are also counting as an exogenic factor in changing the exogenic processes, driving them, and we could discuss some examples of how this happens, for example, concerning floods or storms. Because they do not occur suddenly. I'll get to this. So yeah, just a reminder, the Earth is about 4 billion years old, and the processes are expected to last beyond. So the Earth itself, if it were in a legal court, the Earth wouldn't care. It would say, I'm here, I'm not guilty, I'm just doing my things. But the exogenic forces so are the ones that we should be considering. And the result is a complex interaction. We have different phases. The Earth is mostly solid, apart from some liquids within the Earth. I'm not talking about those in this context here. But what can change and what can go around the Earth very quickly is through liquids and solids at the Earth's surface. So the oceans are amazingly able to mix chemicals, and that can lead to tipping points to long-term changes in the ocean chemistry affecting animal life in the oceans. But of course, any volcanic eruption or any other factor leading to change the aerosols, the reflectivity of the sun, what gets held back in the atmosphere, that is the main matter of concern in this round. But of course, there's an interaction also with the solid Earth, the soil layers, the upper centimeters, the upper meters, and that complex interaction is what I'm referring to here, which is why there will rarely be any clear answers. If you engage in discussions with scientists and they give you a clear-cut answer, it's this way, then we know we have left the field of science and we are entering other disciplines. So here, what I want to point out then is that there are some events on these dynamic planets that occur unexpectedly, I should add, in space. I want to emphasize this difference. Unexpectedly in space, because theoretically nowadays for floods we can have warning. Yeah, if we see the weather coming, meteorologists have so many data. We noticed during the pandemic when the airplanes were not flying as much, the weather models were getting worse and worse, and now they're getting better again. So it's because we have enough data to feed them, and it's quite possible to very accurately predict, not only forecast, but to predict where, when, and how much water might be expected. But there are some amazing effects to the ground that really even catch the surprise of scientists. I want to point out a recent lecture, the last lecture given by James Kirtner at the ETH Zurich, his retirement lecture, where they're now quite sure that they have found when the water pounds on the ground and a flood is about to happen, a strong rain event, there is an additional effect because the pore space of the water gets compressed, and then even more water that's stored in the ground gets released. And that is what's surprising even the models and so on. So we're not finished even understanding the basic behavior of these floods, but floods and storms have some precursors. We know they're coming. Another hurricane approaching to Florida, we know this well ahead of time, so there's preparedness that can be done easily. But the other ones, those that occur suddenly, such as earthquakes, which I'm of course very familiar with, but actually fires are behaving very similar in, at least our understanding about fires is very similar to earthquakes. There are many, many, many small ones, and there are few large ones, and there are very few these extreme events. And so right now we're having the catastrophe, the disaster in Los Angeles, of course. A lot of people, this is really a good question for debate, but from a scientific or an earth perspective, it's like, yeah, another fire, right? It's just accidentally that houses are in the way and people. That's where this becomes a problem for us. So the scientific concepts behind it that we could elaborate on are concepts like recurrence time in the case of earthquakes. Well, for fires, it's probably not a good concept to use because it's a stochastic problem, and really it's just not possible to predict when. But we can overall predict there will be a lot more small ones and a few big ones, these magnitude-frequency relationships that earth scientists are very familiar with. That's a fractal distribution. Complexity we already touched upon. And tipping points are probably the biggest concern related also to the uncertainty of the occurrence. We are now, as a community, as a society, I think we're fearing tipping points because we just don't know whether they will happen, when they will happen, and what will happen after the tipping points have occurred. And for this, there would be a rich scientific basis of knowledge for climate change that has happened in the course of Earth's history. But I have become very cautious as a geologist to talk about, yes, there has always been climate change on Earth, and I would like to make the point that this is not an argument that I want to any longer provide in this particular debate, because that would imply that people say, well, see, told you Earth can do that on its own, there is no human contribution. That could not be farther from the truth. But still, the Earth can recover from climate change. For example, we know that up northwest of Greenland, everybody knows where Greenland is, there is an island called Axel Heiberg Island, and paleontologists have found crocodiles, fossil crocodiles up there. So obviously they need warmer temperatures, also plants accordingly, so we do know that the entire Earth at some point was, or several times, was significantly warmer than today. We also know that slush ball Earth, snowball Earth concepts, that it was significantly colder than today, so the Earth by itself has always recovered. But of course what we don't know very well yet is how fast does that happen, and how long do these states last. And all of that is not a debate that is directly relevant for us in the very short term, because we need to have answers today, tomorrow, and the next, let's say, 10 years or 50 years, maybe 100 years. So my personal research challenge would be to better find out how can we use this knowledge about the Earth on the longer time scales in context bearing on the short-term problems. So coming then just to the bare basis, again, just maybe a definition of risk to remind ourselves is, of course, there is some hazards toward this risk applies. A storm hazard, how likely is it that my house will burn down? How likely is it that my house gets flooded here, let's say in Munich? We're not considering this, we're saying we're on the second floor, because we're not considering mega floods that might be coming out of the Alps if we get more rain. But if I'm looking underground, there are a lot of gravels, and I would conclude as a geologist, well, a lot more water has been here in the past. So how do we know whether we should expect more? exposure is self-explanatory. Vulnerability is a great concept because it's a perception. That is something we have to decide individually how we deal with this. So most of what we scientists, I think, can and should be contributing to is actually hazard assessment to better understand what areas, what regions are prone to certain kinds of hazards and not to overlook one. And then to help with risk mitigation. And I think that's where the societal discussion can take place, is the mitigation. It's a personal choice, it's a community choice, it's a societal choice. And so maybe just as one example, I would like to ask to the rounds for a raise of hands. Who occasionally rides a bicycle? Okay, for the camera, most people are raising their hands, and there's a lot of people in this room. Now, another raise of hands, please, for those who do actually wear a helmet. Who wears a helmet when they bicycle? I would say no more than half of the hands have now gone up, maybe less. So you see, the other ones are now thinking, why are they not wearing a helmet? That is a personal risk perception issue. Another way to deal with this question, let's say in Los Angeles, earthquake hazards, or let's say now with fires, we haven't had that on our radar, is the question, how much money are you willing to spend on an earthquake-proof house? Yeah, let's say students like to save money, so they might live in cheap accommodations. Well, have they thought about, if they were to live in LA, that they might be better off spending more money on an earthquake-proof house? We know plenty of examples where houses collapse, right? It's this is where the discussion, should we be spending all of our money to retrofit buildings or to move cities in flood-prone areas, or are we better off spending the money for the kindergartens, the hospitals, and look after people that way? There is not a clear answer to me, but this is what I would have liked to provide as a basis. So thanks very much for that. Just with a reminder, I just pulled this off quickly from the internet. This is the rate of change of the CO2 concentration. There's no guarantee that this particular plot is correct, but we always, because it was a very quick, the problem is that we always look, this is the hockey stick curve, just plotted as rate of change, because I think that's even more telling than just putting the numbers up. This is the Earth's population, just as a reminder. And the basic point is that they more or less scale, and we have a lot more people now, so the same problems for the atmosphere people 100 or 200 years ago would have not experienced in the same way. Thanks. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so now I would invite both of you to come and sit on these wonderful bar chairs.
You already claimed yours, so I can.
So you can be comfortable. And then, okay. Is that a hazard or?
It was
No hazard.
nicely mitigated.
Thank you both so very much. As you see, you come from extremely different perspectives, but actually I have to say, when Hannah and I were conceptualizing this series, this sort of conversation that you're about to hopefully have is one of the things that we were really excited to see, these very different disciplinary perspectives coming on a topic like the future of humanity and a changing Earth, and where ethics and geology might meet or might diverge. And as it happens, you told me earlier today that this was somewhat talked about in your very first conversation. Sorry, Anke, I'm cheating now based on what you told me already, little tips. But you told me that Markus asked you something about your perception changing about the role of humanity in geology. So perhaps I can provoke you to revisit that point in your conversation and to introduce us to that overlapping.
Maybe since I brought it up, what I remember, it was Christoph Mauch took us to this restaurant. We were accidentally sitting next to each other, first time introducing ourselves. And what I specifically recall, to my big surprise, you had revealed, it seemed to me, you can correct this now, but that basically it seemed to have been a surprise to you that mankind is, after all, not so much the controlling factor for nature. for natural processes, that it's actually not mankind. It's like it could be nature itself. That's what I took away from this in awe, and I was always looking forward to having the follow-up conversation.
Okay. I think we see now we are not able to control the planet, and I think it's a little bit. I think it's something like hubris in the background of the model of the Anthropocene, to promise that we are able, in terms of types of geology of thousands of years or millions of years, to manage the ecological system of the planet. I think we are not able to do that. It's quite clear. And I think my thesis is what we have now is more like the end of the Anthropocene, the end of the dominant position of man in the development of the planet. And we have to face this, and we need an idea to be more part of the ecological systems and not to change all. And I think, for example, I have not just in the models of climate engineering. If we start, we are not able to stop, and it's quite clear we are not possible to manage in terms of several hundred or several thousand years. And you spoke a lot about risk, and I like the book from Ortwin Renn, The Risk Paradox. So he analyzed, or his main idea is we have to learn to fear the right things. And what we fear is dependent on public discussion, and what is or seems to touch our everyday life, but we have quite an irrational awareness of the real risk. And I think that's something what we have to learn. Life is not possible without risks, and we are used to have a time, the last 70 years, especially in Europe, of quite a high level of security. That's not possible as an imagination of future, and it's not necessary to be pessimistic facing a life with new risks. But what we have to avoid is a total collapse. And so it's a very difficult process of learning, and I think in that terms we can learn quite good from people in the global south or in Bangladesh, because it's for their everyday life quite normal to deal with risks.
Would you have an instinctive response?
Yeah, I mean, this is because we're all in the same room, right? So this is, I always like to use personal examples because everyone can relate to it. So since I mentioned the bicycle, remember when you learned how to bicycle way back then, right? And so maybe as children we're actually not even afraid, so it may not be the best example because those things, swimming and bicycling, are things we learn very young, and I don't think we recall any panic attacks when we started to learn how to walk. But if we translate this then to other things, let's say later now, if we could say we all would want to now go scuba diving or in a cave, enter a cave, we have 1,000-meter deep caves, let's all come along. There would be definitely panic attacks and people would freak out and there would be a lot of fear. But why? Because it's not known how you get there. You just panic right away. And I think it's this where professional education, professional training, let's look at athletes. Yeah, since I'm a former athlete, we do know, I think we should have a lot more, let's say, sports or music kind of training. It's systematic training, systematic build up. And so then I would like to ask the question whether our school systems and our actually university education is doing enough. I find that it's not the case for my particular field. It's not a school subject. There is the broader topic of geography, but the natural sciences of geology and geosciences about how the Earth actually works is really not covered. It's covered in 2 double hours. Yeah, so the challenge is how can we bring this in without sacrificing other disciplines that are also important.
think we can circle back to this point of education in a little bit, because I wanted to actually have a provocative question to you, Anke, based on what Markus said about the end of the Anthropocene. Because I really think it's interesting that for Markus the shock was now humanity is not in control of the planet. And one hears geologists talking about the human input in the geology, and I know you've taken students out and showed them how you can see the climate change in the strata itself. Is there a similar shock in the reverse, would you say? That as a geologist you see suddenly, oh, there is a human impact that one can see in the strata? Or would you say that's not the case?
Oh, fantastic. You picked out the perfect question to ask at this point. And I should also admit that sometime since we had this conversation, it has actually started to occur to me. I think this was when Franz Maulshagen was here with the Rachel Carson Center, and when I learned from all of you the definition of, let's say, the Anthropocene, because as a geologist I would have maybe said, no, it's not necessary to have that, because our definitions of new divisions in geological time means that it has to be something permanently available in the geological record. So let's say only about 10 years ago I would have strictly not needed this concept at all. But then I think Christoph told me that the Anthropocene can start when it comes in our consciousness, and as soon as it's in our consciousness we need to deal with it. And so since then I'm actually going with my students to certain places where we conduct our field camps, and actually in fact we do find plastic now several meters down, so it's like, oops, at least temporarily the definition has actually been met. And so I would say, ironically, I would have to retract this, and we have learned from geoengineering and also from the climate actions that we're doing. I mean, not the climate actions, but the climate changing factors that humans actually can control, the exogenic portion. And so me as an endogenic geologist, someone studying the tectonic forces, it's understandable that I would have not naturally come from this. But yeah, so I think both sides have been surprised.
I think it's quite interesting the history of the reception of the term Anthropocene. At the beginning, Zalazewicz, it was a theory of catastrophe. He, as a geologist, is interested what will remain from humankind when we are dead. Yes, we will not exist. And plastic and nuclear energy, radioactivity, and some other things. But then, especially through the exhibition in Berlin, Haus der Kulturen, and here at the German Museum, it was changed in a quite optimistic theory. The world in our hands, and we have the possibility to shape the global ecological systems. And it's necessary to change it, to make it attractive. And I think it's also quite interesting, the WBGU reflected about us with a different time scale. At the beginning it was the time scale of geology, but for politics it's not relevant to think in million or thousands of years. And they adapted the model to the reflection about the role of fossil energy. So they spoke about modernity, and the great transition means a post-fossil time. And that's something what is relevant for our society. And that was the starting point of the political career of the term. And I think it's quite interesting, that very deep change in understanding the Anthropocene. And I think it's quite clear the main interesting thing for understanding our time is to reflect about the role of humankind in interaction with the planet. But it's quite clear the Anthropocene as a geological term is not quite clear, and so the world society refused to accept it. But for a solid understanding, we need an interdisciplinary approach and a better understanding. Then it could be a leading term for our time. But up to now, it's not clearly defined.
Yeah, no, I maybe just to emphasize that, to stress that we do need that term, and this is interesting, the concept of geologists, right? Geology is a discipline that also has many negative connotations over time, let's say at least the last 100 years. There are, well, I'm just saying oil and gas, we're all depending on it. There was a time when this was all necessary. Now it's getting to be a bad reputation. So if there's a geologist who talks about oil and gas or petroleum energy resources in general in that way, there is already such a negative connotation that it's my impression that we're not being listened to. There's no chance, right? Because now it's environmentally, to be environmentally conscious, clean energy and so on, so you can't talk about it. But we then usually joke and say, well, anyone who has any synthetics on them, please strip yourself naked, and then we can continue the discussion, just to see how deeply this has penetrated everything. And so, but at the same time, or geologists, let's say wartime in crisis, that's when we need geologists. Can these tanks drive through the mud? Is this water drinkable? And then all of a sudden geologists are relevant, but we have forgotten to educate everybody. These are basic things. It's not rocket science as such. These are things that everybody could learn, but it's just not in people's minds. So then we're struggling behind to be quick enough to actually train the people when they need it. There could be so much more. But also to take ourselves by our own nose, as we say, I would say we're being too strict and hindering ourselves by neglecting to consider the Anthropocene as an important topic of conversation. It's totally okay. And this key to me that turned me around was this, to get it into the consciousness that the Hegelian time has ended and we have now this in our mind. I think that's a hugely important factor that I take away from the Rachel Carson Center.
I think what's really interesting there, Anke, is you're talking about ethics in a sense changing geology, not only for you personally, but also in terms of what's accepted as a geology to do, what's not interesting as a geology to do. Would you, Markus, say that ethics or Christian theologic thought has been changed by geology? Or at least in your perspective?
Yes, I think so too.
Good answer.
To start with that, I think what we need is not only or is a change in our deeper understanding of our leading values, like freedom or happiness or welfare. And the religions are part of the problem, because they have quite often the traditional thinking. In connection with modern society, for example, Christian hope is transformed as an idea for progress. But because the religions are part of the problem, they have to be part of the solution. They have to rethink their values in a full world, as Weizsäcker says in the Club of Rome report. The biblical idea to rule over the world is written about a background of an empty world, where it's possible. Not now we have a full world, and we have changed our ideas, so we can rethink our way of reading, for example, also the Bible. And I think many ideas of sustainability are included in the Old Testament, but we are not used to read it and to discover it. For example, the catastrophes of the Egyptian Plagen, that are all steps of an ecological catastrophe. The animals who are protected are very important for the ecological balance in the systems, or the idea of clean water is very important for survival. So a lot of knowledge, of ecological knowledge, is in the background of the rules of the Old Testament, and we can rediscover it against our own tradition. And I think the questions and some ideas we can learn from geology for a new understanding, new shaping of Christian values. But it's quite clear what we need is something like spirituality, or to say it, a new metaphysics of understanding of time, of room, and that's not only possible in a dialogue with geology, with physics, quantum physics or something, that deeper level of dialogue is necessary for transforming our ethics. It's my thesis.
Thank you. Do you have a response? Or?
Well, I'm just thinking that in this case, that might be actually the explanation and potentially part of the solution, because if we think of all the millions of scientists who probably are, I mean, including myself, would have been turned away. It's like we hear these statements by religious groups one way or another, or even in the Bible, you know, the age of the earth is 6,000 years old. In this day of age, any scientist will just walk away from the table if that is seriously debated. And so as long as that is the case, we don't have to be surprised if we're not making any progress in providing the technological and scientific advance in the same conversation for, let's say, general people and groups of religion, let's say.
Yes, but it's a misunderstanding of the text of the Bible. They are not a naturalistic report of the world, but they are a special poetic transforming of the worldview of that time. In the old, and they read very exactly and intelligent the explanations of the world in that time. And to have it with a lifeful theology, it's necessary to understand the narratives of physics or geology, of understanding our world, and then to transform it in narratives which help us to understand ourselves in a better way. And I think in our time we are quite dualistic. We have an understanding of ourselves with our idea of freedom, and we have a worldview, quite a naturalistic worldview, with causality, and there is no room for meaning, no room for freedom, and so I think that's interesting from Vitai Ghosh, that he says we have also in the novels in the 19th century excluding of a deeper understanding of nature. It's only a narrating of conflicts in the society, and the natural understanding of nature we understood or understand now as a question of natural science, but without including our self-understanding. And that's a schizophrenia of our time. And for that we need a better understanding of the narratives, or in the background of our geology or physics, to connect it with our self-understanding. For that we need literature, and we need also philosophy and theology and anthropology.
Well, the thought that now has come to my mind is I would also give the credit to the times when we didn't have the scientific understanding why earthquakes and floods occurred, and to then look for, let's say, biblical explanations or explanations involving gods and ghosts and so on. But why is it then that this persists? I mean, I know many people who are very, I don't know if one should say spiritual or religious. I'm not an expert to understand fully the boundaries and the difference, but it seems to me that some of them are quite able actually to do both. They, in 1 minute they think about their religion, and then they turn around, they do their science or their technique. So why is that possible? And at the same time, I feel that in this day of age where everything's accelerating, complex life, complex interactions are accelerating. Now we have AI really being a trigger for further acceleration, where acceleration, meaning that we can hardly keep pace making the right decisions, and it's because we can't know the answers. It's no longer predictable which way we should go. And then I personally believe that it's important just to go as long as possible until you see, whoops, this is really the wrong train, and then jump, because there are other pathways, right? And that's how it should be. And so this takes courage, and it takes the acceptance, in my opinion, to actually say it's a time when science and the knowledge coming from science should maybe be the driver and not the religious beliefs, because they would be holding up. And one example from 2015, that Nepal earthquake, we had a nice Rachel Carson Center event for this, a mock press conference, and I recall from it, the Nepalese, the locals, they didn't want that. You know, we were interfering with their way of being. They didn't want to be helped in that way because they had already decided what was good and bad when these events happened.
Yeah. I would agree, but not understanding in such way hierarchic. I think there are different ways to understand our world. It's quite clear it's not helpful to have religion or spirituality against natural sciences. But the problem is our civilization is divided in two cultures, as Snow said. Self-understanding and understanding the world, materialistic and understanding of the outside world. And we are not able to connect it. And that, I think, is the challenge for environmental humanities also, to connect it and to have a deeper understanding what is the meaning of that, what we know with empirical data. And for example, I think it's quite irrational. We have many thousands of scientists for research and collecting data about climate change. But we have very few or quite few scientists, researchers about the cultural meaning, about the ethical conflicts. But that is necessary to have political acceptance and knowing how to act. And I think that is a disproportionality to have such intensive natural science research and such small knowledge about the cultural aspects.
I think this is a good point to open to the audience at large.